Rogar Runt, Clara, Geen, and Kane were forging new alliances, both menacing and innocent, huge and small, trustworthy and suspicious. These five found themselves snowbound in the dale and town of Ashmanford. Our adventures were in close quarters for several weeks, learning more about each other, recuperating from recent fights, resupplying, and then suddenly, a strange summons came from a local celebrity. And then they found themselves heading towards the manor house of the minstrel Jahar Brightsong. When they arrived at dinner at the manor house, the minstrel was providing answers to several of the party's questions, including a shocking piece of information for Geen that has given her a lead on a spice trader that fit the MO of a notorious man that stole her sister a year and a half before our adventurers had met. Brightsong also informed Kane that his uncle, Burkle, was headed north, had been headed north on the Iron Road in service of this same rather questionable trader, Kara Thor. Our adventurers finished dinner at the manor of Jahar Brightsong. This famous minstrel informed them that Uncle Burkle had been in the employ of an unsavory spice trader and the merchant Kara Thor, and had since disappeared. Because this minstrel suspected foul play, she bade our travelers to go out of the Dale Land, past the ruins in Tarim Keep, and follow the iron route to the city of Flan on the north edge of the Moonsea. This famous minstrel also pledged her sponsorship of this quest to locate, rescue, or revenge Kane's lost uncle, Berkelish Dormir. So our adventurers left dinner only to find that they had been evicted from the inn where they were staying, with the innkeeper already having packed their weapons and possibles. And they were provided a cart and 4 horses, which were hitched, saddled, and ready. The innkeeper, when he was asked, insisted that they leave for their safety and the safety of everybody in town. To punctuate this ejection from the inn and the town, they were set upon by a vicious ghost of this crushed elven maiden. The party fought together to defeat this specter. They survived unscathed, though the victory cost them one of their new mounts. They then embarked on a long journey, 15 days to Flan, which gave the party an opportunity to learn more about each other and prepare a strategy to hide their identities. But when they approached the gate of Flan, they nearly found themselves arrested by a large group of Blackfists and a local guard. It was only after a second larger group of these same Blackfists arrived and an argument ensued under 2 commanders over who should have custody of our adventurers that they were able to be guided to the compound of the merchant Braden Yill. When they arrived, Braden Yill paid the guards that had bore them safely to his care and welcomed them inside, at which point he told Geen that or at least he alluded to the fact that he knew something of Geen's sister. The party learned that Uncle Burkle, Kane's Uncle Burkle, had been contracted to receive a long-haul cargo in the east. This was a special delivery that was being expected by the tyrant merchant Kara Thor. For whatever reason, he decided not to fulfill his duty and take this cargo, which turned out to be Geen's sister, to Kara Thor's stronghold, and instead went north and was seen in the town of Flan. And that's where our party picked up on the trail. Weeks later, and weeks before, actually, our party arrived in Flan, Kara Thor had left, assuming, and we'd found out that he had left with Geen's sister in tow. Last week, our party stormed Grimshackle Jail, or I should say that they went there hoping to find Burkle, tried to buy his freedom, or intended on it, and ended up emerging with a half-orc mercenary named Rathine Fell in the process of getting out of Grimshackle Jail. They were involved in a large battle, or well, I'd say maybe not a large battle, but it was a violent battle with a Minotaur captain of the Grey Patriots, who apparently knew Raytheon Fell. They were able to defeat this foe, and then found themselves following Raytheon, who said she knew how to find Burkle. When we left last week, they had come upon a shipping caravan, and they were on their way to Melvant, or at least they were heading in that direction. And as we left, Rogar received word that from the master of this caravan that they had come upon the body of a dead cleric of Helm and several dead paladins. He informed him of this, and as the party was gathering around the campfire, one of the party was back in the darkness, a little farther away from the flames. A gentleman came up to her and offered her a blanket, and this was Geen. And he dropped the blanket, seeing her face. She caught it, and when she looked up, he was gone, and the next thing she knew, she had a blade to her throat. She felt the slightest nick, and then the world started to spin as she fell into unconsciousness. Our party is hot on the trail of Kane's uncle Burkle. They have been to a jail looking for them. They ran across a they ran across a caravan as they left the jail, and before they could even enjoy a night's sleep, Geen was snatched from them. This saw our party have to attempt to leave this caravan, but be stalled because the master of the caravan recognized Raytheon Fell and held her at sword point, not allowing our heroes to chase after their friend. Rogar acted as leader for the group, stood up and negotiated her release so that she could lead them both now to Geen and to Burkle. He also acquired a horse for some gold, but in the process, not just giving up gold, but actually having to sign a magical contract, swearing that he would not double-cross this caravan master. Upon getting the signature, he released the party, who then spent a day in pursuit, heading towards their friend, or where they believed their friend to be. Right before the morning, Geen awoke, and she found herself having been knocked out for almost 24 hours, hearing a conversation between a crazed sorcerer and someone on the other end of a missive stone. It was notable because she heard the name of her sister, and she could hear the absolute desperation in this man's voice as he tried to convince them that she was actually her sister. That Geen was her sister, and he had her. He was summarily cut off because he had botched the theft of this caravan of Peter Mornhell, at which point, enraged, he turned on Geen, spitting all sorts of venomous threats and locking her in magical bonds. But luckily, as he ransacked through her things, he found her father's bell, and upon ringing it, Geen found herself released, in which case she engaged in mortal combat and defeated this foe. Unfortunately, before she had a chance to find out anything more of her sister. However, she now does have evidence that Karathur is indeed the one that is keeping her prisoner. Shortly after this, our party arrives at the same location where Geen was being held, and this is the Cove of Crowns. When they raced down into this area, they found they saw Raytheon Fell race into her tent, where she found the body of her daughter. Pleading with Rogar and screaming out loud, Geen was alerted to their presence and ran towards them to be greeted by a rather jovial and happy runt. They all then found themselves returning to a a pyre that they had discovered on the way in where there was a massacre, dead clerics and paladins of the Order of the Gauntlet. Where they had been there before, they found a journal of this, of the head cleric of this order, Archon Lavashield. This is now in their possession. Doing his duty, Rogar performed last rites for both the daughter and his fallen comrades, and with the help of his party, sent a column of holy light into the air. And it was here that we left the party as the clouds parted, and over on a distant hill, the force that had so recently ransacked this marauders' camp at the base of this Cove of Crowns. And an evil presence there, a sorceress, who they've heard mention of, cast a spell causing one of the Grey Patriots who had fallen protecting this village to rise from the dead, turn, and threaten Rogar. Rogar quickly dispatched this corpse as his friends now raced towards the safety of this stronghold. And that's where we will pick it up. Geen and Clara, Runt, and Kane are all on horseback, racing towards the sandy ravine that heads into this encampment on the shores of the Moonsea. All right. Last time, our party was hot on the trail of Kane's Uncle Burkle, and he holds the key to where Geen is going to find her sister. The company had escaped a horde of kobolds and orcs commanded by a dragonborn sorceress. They found themselves on a boat with a wounded Grey Patriot marauder. The Grey Patriot marauder helped them pilot that boat after they had found an improvised way of securing the rudder, and they headed out of the harbor. They headed into the middle of the Moonsea, and their voyage was guided by a tattoo that was on the hand of this Grey Patriot navigator. He had proven to be a little bit troublesome, so they lashed him to the side of the boat. Our party had a chance to relax and collect itself a bit as they took turns guiding the vessel. And as the night set and the moon came out, they heard far-off lightning and the creak of the deck and the whoosh of the sails, and then suddenly the tightening of ropes. And it became apparent that this pilot, Jaren, was transforming. And under that moonlight, that blood-red moonlight, he transformed into a werebore, which now stands in front of them, casting off the remnants of the ropes that were on it. Our party was hot on the trail of Kane's Uncle Burkle, who holds the key to the whereabouts of Geen's sister. Having escaped an attacking horde of the attacking horde of a dragonborn sorceress filled with orcs and kobolds, they found themselves on a boat captained by a werebore, Jaren Redstream. This werebore was the bastard son of Sand Krulik, the leader of the marauding Grey Patriots, and they're led to understand that this werebore has a bone to pick with his dad, and indeed may actually be vying for the control of the Grey Patriots. While it appeared that the werebore was actually content to help them sail in service of his revenge quest, the weather did not cooperate, and the party found themselves bobbing on the Moonsea in the middle of a violent squall. Jaren was able to pilot the ship through this treacherous weather, but in the process, the party's dear friend and member, Clara, was first smashed by a wave of water,
loose barrels on the deck and then carried overboard, lost to the sea. Unable to stop and save her, the party was forced to stay on board the ship as it was piloted into calmer waters. Runt had found Clara's bag and had found some of the items, including a black onyx lotus that she had picked up from the deck. As the weather began to be not pleasant, but at least calm, Runt found that object was activated, and the glowing visage of a sage appeared before them, asking where Clara was. He was making some interesting assertions when Geen recognized this person, and he recognized her. They had a few moments to exchange information, and he was able to issue a warning, and then suddenly he was surrounded by a violent black mist, which first faded his image and then eventually took him all the way out of their view as the item which Runt was holding returned to an inactive state. Then, surrounded in an unearthly blue light, the party was assailed by a specter, a ghost that they had actually seen once before in Ashe Benford. And after a violent confrontation, which actually resulted in the liquefaction by necrotic damage of Wraitheen Fell, they defeated this specter once again and forced it off the material plane. The party found itself on the deck, and they were recovering, binding their wounds and recovering from this fight, when Kane spotted flotsam in the water and Clara's body amongst it. Heroically, he dove in after it, and after receiving a rope from Geen, was able to pull Clara's shattered form onto the deck. When they brought it up and they removed her hood, they saw that her face now perfectly resembled the specter that they had seen both there moments before and at the beginning of this quest after talking to Lady Brightsong.
Our party survived a treacherous crossing across the Moonsea. This claimed the lives of 2 of their friends, including one of the party members, Clara. The morning of that day, the boat raced towards shore and was beached. And Jaren Redstream, the werebore pilot, quickly hopped off, carrying a treasure chest, escaping from the party and heading down the beach towards the town of Keep's Sorrow. They readied the bodies of their friends to get off the boat. And as the tide rose, Rogar found himself anchoring the party as they pulled each other onto shore. While they intended to bury the body, there was no place, and so they headed down the stretch of beach. Eventually, obstructed by the incoming tide, Geen, heartbroken at the death of her friend Clara, angry at a secret that had been uncovered between Clara's partnership with her mentor Goro, took the time to say goodbye to her friend, set her adrift on the Moonsea, and committed her body to its depths. Finding themselves sheltering in a cave with a strange hermit, Runt was given a gift of 2 ancient bone daggers. And after that afternoon convalescing there, as the tide withdrew and they were able to make it the rest of the way to Keep's Sorrow, they were met by a strange gnome named Bilk, who helped them find an inn where they were able to spend the night and finally get a long rest. After that night, they were awoken by voices and the sounds of the town waking up and merchants getting on the road. Both Rogar and Kane descended the steps. Rogar found himself following a captain he suspected to be a Grey Cloak, a Grey Patriot, and Kane heard the booming voice of a Minotaur. And as he listened, it was clear that this Minotaur was arranging purchase and whatnot. And the person he was talking to when he spoke uttered familiar words of 15 gold for 15 skillets. A Grimshackle brother, one that they'd encountered at Grimshackle prison near the town of Flan, then emerged, and seeing Kane, he got a mischievous look in his eye, pointed it at him, and uttered a threat. 15 gold to keep his mouth quiet. We're not sure exactly what he intends to do. Our party found themselves in Keep's Sorrow after crossing the Moonsea. They were able to pick up the trail of the Grey Patriots, which held hostage Kane's uncle Burkle. They also attracted the attention of a former jailer of Grimshackle Jail, Bevik, a halfling that then sought to extort money from the party in return for silence around an implication that they were responsible for the murder of the brother of one of the Grey Patriot commodores who was there in the town and quite enraged. Kane and Rogar set about negotiating the price of his silence and were able to successfully negotiate it down to 2/5 the price in order to pay him off without violence. But Geen and Rund had other plans. Geen skillfully distracted Kane by planting a kiss at the right time, as Runt took matters into her own hands, entered the barber shop of Bilcorin Ordame, and proceeded to attempt to intimidate Bevik Grimshackle into remaining silent. But he'd have none of it. And Runt then attacked as she held a dagger to his throat. A scuffle ensued, and with the help of the barber, Runt was able to dispatch this person. That frightened gnome barber then pleaded with the party who had all come in to see this scene of bloodshed to flee the city. He was already nervous about a string of murders that had occurred. He was very frightened by this, and they packed the corpse of this halfling into a crate, proceeded to gather horses and head out of the city in pursuit of Wart Hollow and 3 armed and protected Grey Patriot wagons. They found themselves heading south from Keep Sorrow, crossing an intersection now deep into the Cormanthor forest on the Dumathampter Road, which runs parallel to the river of the same name. Night fell. The party was forced to take shelter and make camp, and most of the party now sleeps. The party found its way across the Moonsea, and in the process of doing so, lost one of the party members and a dear friend, Clara. They made their way to Keep's Sorrow, a harbor town on the edge of the Moonsea, where they were able to pick up the trail of the Grey Patriots by running into a Commodore Minotaur by the name of Wart Hollow. They also ran into a precocious Grimshackle halfling, and through the course of several interchanges, they had to dispatch this halfling in order to protect their anonymity and their identity as they could infiltrate the Grey Patriot camp. The next session, they found themselves on the Duathamper Road, and after spending a night together, growing a little closer as a party, they picked up and found their way down the Duathamper Road and turned onto the Harrowdale Road. At that point, they found a burned-out wagon and eventually the bodies of a couple of dead Grey Patriots. They continued on and found a couple of wagons being assailed by a warband of goblins. The party raced in to their aid, Runt taking off alone into the wilderness, eventually confronting the war chieftain as well as a large, menacing ogre. The party made, I wouldn't say quick work of it, it was very complex. Waves and waves of goblins were coming at them. They were able to defend 4 persons. A father and daughter, the Keen Seekers, Rowan and Juliana, farmers that had been traveling to Harrowdale. An elf named Kai Tyran, as well as Berga, an injured Grey Patriot. Those 2 Grey Patriot fighters, we don't know why they're there right now. And there was also the body of a Fletcher, who they had met inside Keep Sorrow. Our party had found their way across the Moon Sea to the town of Keep Sorrow, where they picked up the trail of the Grey Patriots. In particular, they were confronted with the menacing visage of a large minotaur. After some troublesome business with a halfling, who Runt ended up dispatching to protect the party's anonymity, they found themselves on the road to Harrowdale. And that was indeed a harrowing experience, as they helped a farmer and 2 of their quarry, the Grey Patriots, escape death at the hands of some goblin hordes. They made their way across the river, Duathamper, found their way into Harrowdale, going through a large checkpoint and having to answer all sorts of questions. The heroines were on high alert. The local city guard was checking everyone in and out, looking for illicit substances. As our party made it through that and had to answer some rather difficult questions, they decided on an inn to stay at, and Rogar split away, seeking the Temple of Chantia and answers regarding the journal we had taken off of a cleric of Helm in the highlands near Philan. The rest of the party found their way to an inn, and Cain went to seek answers about his uncle Burkle and Gein's sister at a precinct of the local guard. Talking to a sergeant, he found some very troubling news which he hasn't had a chance to recite, because upon returning to the inn to collect his traveling companions and tell them what he had learned, a monk, a acolyte of Chantia, was there pleading with them to come, saying that they were bade to the Temple of Chantia by the High Harvest Mistress, the Reverend Mother of that order, and their friend Rogar. And this being after dark now, they headed down the dirt roads of Harrowdale, turning corners, winding through the streets. The party visited the Chantian Temple of Harrowdale, where Rogar learned about a missing magical artifact from the temple's High Harvestress, Hildegard Hills. The party was ambushed. A band of unknown ruffians saved the Harvestress, and they were led to the catacombs and the storage center underneath the temple known as the Bounty. There they were introduced to a shambling, rag-like creature, a myconid. Right before we left our party, as the High Harvestress was charging the party with them protecting this myconid. The myconid released a cloud of rapport spores, and the party began to hear the thoughts of one another echoing in their minds. After several encounters with various foes, on the trail of Uncle Burkle, they found themselves on the outskirts of Harrowdale, and in the camp of the Grey Patriots. And it's taken a lot to get here so far. They've had to make sacrifices. They sacrificed a friend as they were crossing the Moonsea. They had to perform questionable acts as they bought their anonymity and their stealth with the life of a halfling. Now they find themselves here at the center of the Grey Patriots camp, in the middle of a struggle over the leadership of this marauders group. There are women and children around. They are in the service of the High Harvestress of Chauntea, Hildegard Hillis. Teeming around them are the Grey Patriots themselves. They are standing with a group of these mercenaries that have decided to leave life on the road and the life of crime and seek some peace. And opposing them is an even larger Minotaur, also bearing the name of Warthollow, but this one not Captain Warthollow, this one Commodore Warthollow. And he has behind him the remainder of the Grey Patriot force. He is just challenged for leadership of this group. In the middle of this makeshift town, there is a blacksmith in which our party finds itself in front of, in sort of this informal town square. There are wagons and whatnot scattered around. And just down the hill, they can hear a local river going by. This is the River Duathamper. In this teeming throng, we also have Jaren, who they met as they were crossing the Moonsea. And Jaren, the party knows, is a werebore. He's also the son of San Krulik, the leader of the Grey Patriots. He's strode into the middle, and he is adding his voice to the choir. Our party had found themselves outside of Harrowdale, in the camp of the Grey Patriots, and guarding the High Harvestress, a priestess of Chauntea, as she tried to garner support for peace among two warring leaders within the Grey Patriots. With the help of San Krulik's werebore son, some old ghosts were brought in that haunted the party, particularly the death of, or the murder, I should say, of a halfling. And among the chaos, a brand new figure appeared, cloaked in shadow, weaving darkness. This poetic assassin, I think we were calling him, this haiku assassin, showed up and turned several of the Grey Patriots, triggered them, and suddenly this black ichor appeared on several faces, streaking down part of their face, and these Grey Patriots picked up weapons and began hacking at their fellow soldiers. Just suddenly, all hell broke loose. We knew that Uncle Burkle was in an armored wagon, and Geen and Runt lit off for that wagon as Kane attempted to stop the wagon using magic. But soon the wagon was tearing away, and Kane, Geen, and Runt were on it trying to gain entry, which they did. Meanwhile, Rogar was in the heat of battle, standing shoulder to shoulder with San Krulik and the High Harvestress as they fought to protect the women and children of this camp. It culminated with the death of the second Minotaur that Rogar had to dispatch. And in the process, Jaren the Wereboar was nearly killed. The High Harvestress removed a curse, and now it seems as though his lycanthropy has been purged. Our party left Harrowdale to help the High Harvest Mistress of Chauntea try to negotiate a peace among two warring factions of the Grey Patriots mercenary group. This boiled down into a vicious fight, and in the middle of it, a shadow-clad, evil, bard-like Shadakar elf appeared and triggered a bunch of sleeper Karathur fighters and enemies. Seeing most of the Grey Cloaks now fighting their own with tar-streaked faces, signaling that they had been possessed or taken over, or their minds had been manipulated in some way. With all of this, Geen and Kane and Runt were on an armored wagon that was tear-assing across the countryside, and they managed to get into this wagon where they found Uncle Burkle. Dispatching the driver, getting control of the wagon, Runt lit off back to the camp where she helped Rogar dispatch a large Minotaur foe. And as Rogar and Runt and the High Harvestress gathered the widows and the broken and the children and what remained of the Grey Cloaks forces, they left as refugees back to Harrowdale. Meanwhile, Kane and Geen took this armored wagon back to Harrowdale before the main throng of people arrived back at the Chauntean Temple. They were able to get Burkle to safety down into the deep catacombs and cellars of the Bounty, this underground storage area where they had been given a fortified position. Later, the Harvestress, Rogar and Runt joined them, and with the help of the Myconid that they had left there, Pivik, they were brought into the mind of Burkle, descending into this ethereal space, down a silvery strand, and onto a four-spoked wheel. This four-spoked wheel was off-kilter, and these bridges, these long spokes that extended from it, were hanging in space, while these four gates circled around it. There was a courtyard in the middle of these four large half-bridges. This is a massive structure, and in it was this malfunctioning fountain. Our adventurers were able to figure out that by adjusting the water flow and getting it to a certain speed, they were able to control the synchronization of this large wheel so it could match up with these gates. The ends of these bridges locked into place, and now they are each capped with this portal, and they're quite a ways off in the distance. We haven't been down there yet. In the process of doing this wheel began to spin very, very quickly. And although he grasped on to these Luhix vines, Kane was tossed off into the darkness. Panicking, or out of concern and in an attempt to save her comrade, Geen leapt after him. At the end of last session, they awoke. Geen awoke back in the warm, dry apartment, fortified position that had been given inside the Bounty, with the High Harvestress still trying to summon all of her healing abilities to keep Burkle alive, and Pevik still casting spores. But upon leaving these balances, both Kane and Geen suffered terrible psychic damage, blood spilling from their noses. After following on the trail of Uncle Burkle for several weeks now, they finally caught up to the Grey Patriots and were able to rescue Uncle Burkle. Geen and Kane racing towards the Temple of Chantia, where they sequestered Uncle Burkle deep under the ground in the fortified storage areas of the Chantian Temple known as the Bounty. In their protected alcove, they entered the mind of Burkle, and after completing a series of challenges that helped to alleviate the barriers and the causes of madness, they were able to resurrect his consciousness. It was a big job. It almost cost Kane his life, and he was lying unconscious for a portion of it. But returning to this world out of the mind of Burkle, our players were able to ask him a few questions, but it really quickly became apparent that as Geen pressed him for knowledge and answers around her sister, something else was there. Something that pained Burkle greatly. For while he was able to answer a few questions, it was as if every question that he answered slashed at him, until finally he was unable to continue and fell unconscious. As we left last session, there was a knock on the door, and Jahar Brightsong entered the room. The elven minstrel, which they had first met in Ashabenforth. A person that we know has a very special place in Burkle's life. She is now sitting with him. And she's been sitting with him for several hours, for exhausted our party required rest. And with not else much to do, as the acolytes of Chantia saw to the healing of Kane, the rest of our party was able to rest and recuperate for a number of hours. As they begin to wake, they see that the High Harvestress and Jahar Brightsong are talking in private near Burkle's bed. The High Harvestress had looked exhausted. Our party found themselves having to interrogate or question San Krulik and his son Jaren on the whereabouts of an ancient amulet that was the only hope, according to the High Harvest Mistress and Jahar Brightsong, for saving Burkle's soul, binding it to this amulet so that it could be unbound from an unknown evil force, and he could in fact answer questions and live once again. But if they don't find this amulet, the High Harvestress has told them that Burkle's soul will definitely be lost. He may even die, and if they were to try to sever it at this point, he would be the undead, and that wouldn't be fun for Kane. So knowing that, they sped off to the holding cells of the local city watch. They questioned San Krulik and his son Jaren about the whereabouts of this amulet. They were able to figure out that Jaren had given it as a sign of goodwill, or to buy his way into the favor of Karathur and his seedy underworld at a place called the Stilton Docks. They proceeded to the Stilton Docks. It was the end of the day. Everything was shutting down. Perhaps it was the Labor Day long weekend. They entered the docks right away, and through through a stroke of luck, they were able to find out that indeed there were illicit substances here. In fact, they were able to find mushroom powder, one of the drugs in Faerun, hiding inside a red wrapped piece of cheese, waxed piece of block of cheese. Upon closer inspection, they were able to discover a trap door in the middle of the floor. They went down said door, found themselves descending deep into the chalk caves of Harrowdale. There, they were greeted by an insidious laughter. At first, a halfling with a halberd showed up and was giggling and wiggling at them. And when it was clear that he was none too friendly, they decided to attack. Combat ensued. Rogar jumped into a rowboat, only to spring a trap and be knocked into the water. Geen leapt, using Step of the Wind, for a rock outcropping in the middle of the water, only to find it was a trap, a floating buoy that tipped her into the water. All the while, in this open, single-room bunker, they are separated from this blue form by a stretch of water. And beyond that, several great shelves loom, filled with packages and bottles and what they assume to be valuables of the Karathur crime family, crime empire. The team had worked itself into the underbelly within Harrowdale of the Karathur drug cartel. They had followed the clues and ended up at the Stilton Docks, a cheese warehouse where they were able to discover a hidden passageway, descend down into a refrigerated bunker, where they discovered an Oni, a dangerous troll-like creature from the east. This troll-like creature indicated that it had designs on Harrowdale and planned to be around for quite some time. But our group swam, jumped, and slid over to the platform where the Oni was located. And after destroying shelves, lighting things ablaze, seeing Bilk once again almost get cut in half, our party was able to dispatch this Oni. In no small part because of the magical skills and prowess of their friend, Kane Harbinger. Kane was one of the big reasons why this team was on the search for Uncle Burkle, who they had retrieved a few episodes ago. And in fact, they were down in this bunker looking for the Amulet of Mithranor, which would bind Burkle's soul to it, allowing them to sever his connection to a dark force which was still controlling him, preventing him from answering questions. They returned to the Temple of Chauntea. The High Harvestress was able to help them bind the soul of Burkle to this amulet, but it required a sacrifice. It required that someone wear it, and this parasitic amulet was taken up by the nephew of Burkle. Kane placed it on his neck. It fused with his body with two pincer-like appendages. He was able to bind himself to Burkle and in that way save his life. But in the course of answering all these questions, it was revealed that Burkle had a role to play in the danger now facing Kane's family in Waterdeep. And so, with Jannar Brightsong and Kane Burkle went back to Waterdeep. And this was a surprise for the group, that Kane would indeed be leaving the party. So they find themselves with faith, but perhaps not as much magic, with steel, but without so much law enforcement, and guile without quite so much blind adherence to the law. So here we go. We have a team of 3 now, and we will be moving forward. As we left, and we saw Kane and his uncle ride off into the sunset, Geen standing there, watching the sunset, watching the dusk fall, watching the new moon rise. With the departure of their wizard Kane, we are now down to 3, and we have no one save our paladin who is able to cast substantial magic, although they do all have magic items in their possession. We were visited by Goro, the mentor of Geen from Kozakura. Goro appeared to her, as he has done to the group or to their allies every new moon. He warned of corruption, and Geen was able to ask several questions before once again he was interrupted by the ghost, the spectral figure of Clara, who once again violently dive-bombed the party, and they were forced to extinguish her from this realm, at least temporarily. However, there was a moment where she seemed to recognize Geen. The next day, they were honored by the city of Harrowdale. The mayor invited them down to the Stilton docks, where they had previously uncovered a drug ring, and awarded them one of the city's highest honors, declaring them heroes. But this was not to be a simple celebration, for even before they were able to make any speeches or take any applause, things went pear-shaped. And agents of Karathor appeared in the crowd. One of those sleepers was the personal assistant of the Burgermeister. He ran with the others as a giant cheese construct sprang from a pile of broken cheese. Geen, Runt, and Bill Corin, the gnome, had to engage these assassin agents and attempt to apprehend the secretary, while Rogar and the paladin of Chantia fended off this cheese golem, doing major damage and bringing him down. But in the process, both getting covered in molten, gooey, sticky cheese. It was nacho average encounter. The party left Harrowdale in search of 30 stolen children. And they discovered that at the same time Karathor had shipped away these children, he had sent a shipment of 30 silver mirrors. They were in a tizzy. How could they catch this fast ship? Luckily, the townsfolk banded together, and as concerned parents gathered around, our heroes made their way to the dock to wait, hopefully, for a fast ship that was due to come into port to arrive so that they could start their pursuit. We weren't sure that the ship was going to arrive. Rogar fell to his knees and issued a prayer. The townsfolk joined in, and soon after, a ship appeared on the horizon. Late at night, the ship pulled into dock. The townsfolk gathered together. They unloaded the ship quickly, and our heroes were led aboard joined by Griffaro, the paladin of Chantia, and Bilk, our gnome barber friend. Griffaro carried with him a chest that had been brought by the High Harvestress, as well as a robed figure that Geen discovered was the Myconid Pevik. And as the last beams of light left the day, and darkness became deep, they set out. Our party had left Harrowdale, and they were on board the merchant ship, the Dancing Sword. With its crew of 26, they felt relatively safe. It gave us a chance to have Geen and Rogar find a quiet spot and really contemplate how far they'd come and what were the big clues and plans that they needed to share. Meanwhile, Bill Korn, our gnome friend, and Runt played dice all night long with the sailors of the boat as they came and went from their shifts. We found out a little bit about the crew of the Dancing Sword. We found out that the Chantian paladin Griffaro may have some gastric issues. Griffaro brought forth a chest, and in that chest there were letters and gifts from the High Harvestress. The session before, our parties had advanced, our players had advanced to level 6, and so all of this is going to take on a slightly different tone. Geen and Rogar went to bed, and as they awoke shortly after, Runt found her way to her cot, or underneath it, and Bill Corum fell asleep in his oatmeal. They again had a chance to sort of start to consider who they could ask and what the crew might be able to teach them. And then, sitting aboard the top side of the vessel, an arrow from the crow's nest flew into the deck next to the captain, signaling that something was on the horizon. No screaming took place as it becomes apparent that the ship is in silent running. And indeed, soon, Guarella, the halfling purser, comes to them and says, "There's a ship, a sail on the horizon." And all sheets are turned to the wind, and now the Dancing Sword is coursing ever closer to that sail, which is still but a speck on the distance on the horizon. Our party made it to the waters of the Sea of Fallen Stars. They're on board, or were on board, the second fastest ship that they know of. Possibly the fastest now with how lightly it's loaded. This is the Dancing Sword. They gained and gained and gained upon their quarry, which was the ship of Karathur, the Shadow's Glint. They tracked the ship and they followed it into the center of the sea. And they came upon these strange obelisk-type geological features. And as they followed them inside, suddenly they realized that the natural wind around them had died down. And any magical wind, any magical speed that they had managed to conjure with the several wizards and witches that were on board was quelled and suppressed. And both ships slipped forward and then stopped. Soon they were set upon by an oared galley, which, with a battering ram front, dove its nose deep into the side of the Dancing Sword. our party boarded the galley, and soon, along with the crew of the Dancing Sword, were engaged in a ferocious melee. Once they had secured the ship, they heard of a rumor of a witch trapped in a sarcophagus below deck on this galley. They went down and indeed found one empty and one still locked sarcophagi. They opened it up and were met with a surprise.